At the Christmas Eve dinner in Seattle, my father Robert raised his glass with that slow, smug smile I'd seen every year of my life. "To the one who still can't seem to get her life together," he announced, his voice carrying over the clink of silverware. My sister Danielle didn't miss her cue. She leaned forward, eyes glinting. "But at least she makes the rest of us feel financially better about ourselves." The familiar laughter rolled around the table, effortless, rehearsed, cruel. I took one slow sip of my wine, set the glass down, and met every pair of eyes in the room. "To the one," I said evenly, "who just sold the lakefront cabin in Oregon you've been living in, rent-free." The clinking stopped. My father's smile collapsed. Danielle's froze. My mother Elaine's fork hovered in midair. By the time that night arrived, it wasn't just another Christmas Eve dinner. It was the final drop in a glass that had been brimming for years. For Danielle, it would be the beginning of the end, though she didn't know it yet. She'd been living in the lakefront cabin in Oregon for years, rent-free. Not just any cabin, my cabin. I bought it with my own savings, kept the mortgage payments on schedule, handled every repair, and quietly paid the property taxes without ever asking for help. It was the place everyone liked to call the family getaway, but I was the only one who ever kept it standing. Somewhere along the way, Danielle decided it was hers. She spoke about it like she'd built it from the ground up, like she'd worked for every plank of cedar and every stone in the fireplace. She acted like we were all coming to her home for the holidays, a gracious host welcoming us out of the kindness of her heart. The thing is, that attitude didn't appear out of nowhere. It was forged over years of sly remarks, smug comparisons, and carefully staged stories that put her just a notch above me. It didn't matter if I helped her out of a jam, which I did, more than once. The first time was when her business nearly collapsed. I wired her the down payment she needed for a deal she swore would save her from ruin. She promised she'd pay me back. She never did. The second time, she was buried in credit card debt. I paid off enough to stop the calls from collectors. She laughed it off, saying I'd done my good deed for the decade. Every holiday, the pattern repeated. My father Robert would take his shot, usually in the form of a joke, and Danielle would sharpen it with something personal. The rest of the table would laugh, the same automatic chuckle they always gave, while my mother Elaine stared down at her plate, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. I told myself it was easier to play along. I thought that if I stayed quiet, if I smiled and let them have their moment, they'd get bored and move on. But the truth is, they never did. I was the easy target, the one who didn't argue back, the one who could absorb a hit without shattering the picture-perfect holiday dinner. The cabin was the perfect stage for them. Danielle would sit at the head of the table like royalty, telling elaborate stories about her latest business venture, waving her hands like she was in the middle of closing another big deal. She'd serve drinks from the bar I'd stocked, pass around dishes in the kitchen I'd renovated, and smile for photos in front of the fireplace I'd paid to repair. All the while, she'd conveniently forget to mention who actually owned the place. I'd been watching all of this for years, quietly collecting every little slight, every false claim, every unpaid debt. And somewhere in the last 12 months, something shifted in me. I'd started pulling away, not just emotionally, but financially. I stopped picking up the check at family outings. I stopped offering help when Danielle hinted about her unexpected expenses. And then, a few months before that Christmas Eve, I made a decision I didn't tell anyone about. I listed the cabin for sale. Quietly. No announcements, no drama, no warning. I didn't want the fight, not until the deal was done, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. By the time the papers were signed and the deposit hit my account, I'd already decided how this Christmas was going to go. I wasn't coming to be their silent punchline anymore. I was coming to end the story they'd been telling about me for years, and when Robert lifted his glass and Danielle delivered her line, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. The thing about traditions is that people forget how ugly they can be when they've worn the same mask for long enough. For my family, the holiday toast had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. It wasn't the warm, sentimental kind. My father Robert's toasts were performances, a chance to hold the floor, get a laugh, and remind everyone of where they stood. And I was the designated punchline. I can still remember the first time it happened. I was 23, working 2 jobs and still paying off student loans, when Robert lifted his glass at Thanksgiving and said, "To Violet, may she find a career that doesn't require 2 name tags." The table erupted. I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting, but my cheeks burned all the same. It never stopped after that. Each year brought a new version, some small, some sharper. Danielle caught on quickly, becoming his perfect sidekick. If his line was the jab, hers was the twist of the knife. "One Christmas," he said. "To Violet, always finding creative ways to make rent," Danielle added. "Like borrowing from family and forgetting to give it back." Laughter. "Another Easter," Robert quipped. "To Violet, the family's free spirit." Danielle grinned and said, "Emphasis on free in every sense of the word." More laughter. Always laughter. And my mother Elaine? She became an expert in pretending not to hear. She'd fuss with the gravy boat, check the rolls in the oven, anything to keep from acknowledging the exchange. If I ever called it out, she'd sigh and say, "It's just how they joke, honey. Don't take it so personally." But I did. Of course I did. You can only be told you're less successful, less stable, less worthy so many times before you start to wonder if they're right. The cabin became their favorite backdrop for this theater. Danielle would host with the poise of someone who'd earned it, while Robert's toasts doubled as thinly veiled reminders that I hadn't. I'd sit there at the long cedar table, my own table, looking out at the lake through the windows I'd paid to replace, listening to them congratulate each other on their wit. Over time, I became less present, even when I was in the room. I'd fade into the background, letting their words wash over me, counting down the minutes until I could leave. I told myself detachment was strength, that by refusing to react, I was denying them the satisfaction. But the truth was, I was letting them shape the narrative. The real turning point came the year Danielle started introducing the cabin to her friends as her property. I overheard her on the porch one summer afternoon, telling a group of her business contacts that she'd inherited the place from a relative who couldn't keep up with it. She said it so smoothly, so casually, you'd think it was gospel truth. That was when I stopped seeing the cabin as a family retreat and started seeing it for what it really was: leverage. A stage for Danielle's image, a prop for Robert's performances, and a constant reminder that no matter how much I contributed, I'd always be cast as the struggling younger sister. The night of this Christmas Eve, I didn't come just to sit through another round. I came knowing there would be a final toast and that I would be the one to give it. Change didn't come to me all at once. It was a slow drip, the kind you barely notice until you realize the cup is full. I didn't wake up one morning and decide I was done. I eased into it. At first, it was little things: turning down quick loans Danielle asked for, letting her calls go to voicemail when I knew she was circling around to some favor. She liked to frame them as temporary, as if a timeline would make them less of a burden. But temporary had a way of stretching into forever when it came to her. Then I stopped covering for the small stuff. For years, I'd quietly paid for the cabin's utilities, the off-season maintenance, even the landscaping. Danielle would plan summer parties without asking if the property was ready, and I'd rush to make sure it looked perfect before her guests arrived. No more. That spring, when she hinted about hosting a 4th of July barbecue, I said nothing. She showed up to find the dock roped off for repairs, the lawn patchy and overgrown. She didn't invite me the next year. In the meantime, I started keeping records not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Every expense, every wire transfer, every property tax bill I'd covered went into a neat, private folder on my laptop. I didn't need to use it yet, but knowing it was there gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. The real pivot came in late summer. I was sitting on the deck of the cabin, the evening air cool against my skin, looking out at the glassy surface of the lake. Danielle was inside, laughing with her friends, her voice carrying through the open windows. They were talking about a renovation, her renovation, new kitchen counters, updated appliances, maybe even knocking down a wall. I remember staring at the water and thinking, she's already spending money she doesn't have on something that isn't hers. That night, I reached out to a realtor I trusted. We met for coffee in Portland, far enough from the lake to keep it quiet. I explained I wanted to sell, but I needed it handled discreetly. No sign in the yard, no local chatter? He understood. Within 2 weeks, we had professional photos, private listings, and a short list of serious buyers. I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents. Not my closest friends. Definitely not Danielle. It wasn't fear that kept me silent, it was strategy. I'd learned enough about my family to know they could make a problem drag on forever if they saw it coming. The showing process was quick. The cabin's location sold itself. By early November, I had an offer I couldn't turn down. A clean deal, no contingencies, closing before the end of the year. I signed the papers with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. When the deposit hit my account, I didn't feel guilt or hesitation, just relief. From that moment on, I was in countdown mode. I knew exactly what I was walking into at Christmas Eve dinner. The script was predictable. Robert would take the first shot, Danielle would pile on, the rest of the table would laugh. And when the room was primed, I would drop the one line they couldn't laugh away. I wasn't coming to defend myself anymore. I was coming to end the game entirely. The moment the words left my mouth, the lakefront cabin in Oregon you've been living in, rent-free, the air in the room shifted. It was like a pane of glass had cracked somewhere invisible. The laughter stopped mid-breath. Robert's smirk drained away, leaving his face unreadable. Danielle's grin faltered, her eyes flicking toward me as if she needed confirmation that I'd really said it. My mother Elaine froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The silence spoke for me. When the noise of the room finally returned, it wasn't laughter, it was the scrape of chairs shifting uncomfortably, the faint clink of cutlery as people tried to pretend nothing had happened. Robert broke first. "What do you mean you sold the cabin?" His voice had that strained edge he got when he thought someone had embarrassed him. I kept my tone calm. "Exactly what I said." Danielle leaned forward, her voice low but shaking. "You're joking." "You wouldn't." "I did," I said. "It closed weeks ago." Her face flushed. She glanced at our parents like she expected them to step in, but Elaine stayed quiet. Robert's jaw worked, but no words came. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. That night, I left without another word. The next morning, my phone stayed eerily still. No Merry Christmas texts, no obligatory family group messages with photos of the dinner table. By mid-afternoon, the silence broke, first Danielle, then Robert, then Elaine, all calling within minutes of each other. I ignored everyone. They weren't calling to check in. They were calling to undo what I'd already done. They didn't know that the sale had been in motion for months. The listing was private, the showings quiet, the paperwork signed before anyone had a chance to interfere. The deposit was already sitting in my account. There was nothing left to save. For Danielle, it wasn't just losing a place to spend the holidays. She'd been living there nearly full-time for 3 years. The cabin's address was on everything from her bank accounts to party invitations. She'd hosted friends there, posed for pictures on the deck, and passed it off as her own. She never paid a cent toward the mortgage, the taxes, or the upkeep. I'd handled every bill without complaint, and in return, I got to be the butt of the joke at every family gathering. By evening, the knocking started. Sharp, impatient. I opened my apartment door to find Danielle standing there, hair pulled back, no makeup, oversized sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. "You can't just sell it," she said, stepping inside without asking. "I can," I replied, shutting the door behind her. She paced my living room, words spilling out in a rush. Was there still time to cancel? Did I understand what this meant for her? Did I realize how much she'd invested in making that cabin hers? When she finally ran out of steam, I told her the truth. Every bill I'd paid, every repair I'd handled, every time she'd used the place to build her image while chipping away at mine. "It was never yours," I said, "and it never will be again." Her expression shifted, not to anger, but to something closer to disbelief. "You're overreacting." "No," I said, "I'm done." She left without slamming the door. Head down, bag over her shoulder, walking fast like she didn't want anyone to see her. I knew where she was going. Straight to Robert and Elaine. They showed up the next night. Robert's knock was heavy, deliberate. Elaine stood beside him, clutching her purse like it might anchor her to the floor. Inside, Robert took the armchair. Elaine perched on the edge of the couch. He skipped the small talk. Your sister's in shock. So are we. Selling the cabin was drastic. It was overdue, I said. I reminded them that I'd bought it, that I'd paid for it, that every bill had gone through my hands. Elaine tried to interrupt. The cabin became part of the family, but I cut her off. When's the last time either of you paid for a repair? Or a single month of utilities? She didn't answer. Robert shifted in his seat. Families stick together. Sometimes you just have to help each other out. Helping each other out isn't the same as being someone's permanent safety net, I said, especially when the people you're helping humiliate you in your own home. Elaine's voice softened. Maybe things were misunderstood. Maybe we didn't show enough appreciation. There's no maybe, I said. You took me for granted. For years. They didn't deny it. They just sat there, the truth hanging between us. When they left, Robert went straight for the door. Elaine lingered for a moment, looking at me like she didn't recognize me. She didn't ask me to undo the sale. She didn't even try to make me feel guilty. She just nodded once and left. That night, for the first time in years, I felt something shift. The power dynamic wasn't theirs anymore, but I also knew Danielle wasn't going to take the loss quietly. She'd come for me, just not directly. I didn't have to wait long for Danielle's counterattack. She didn't call me again after storming out of my apartment, but I could see the ripple effect almost immediately. Friends I hadn't heard from in months started texting me, some with that careful, polite, just checking in tone, others circling around to questions they didn't quite want to ask outright. It didn't take much to put it together. Danielle was working the phones, weaving her version of the story into every ear that would listen. In her telling, I'd blindsided her by selling the family cabin, a property she had supposedly poured her time and money into, only for me to snatch it away out of spite. She left out the inconvenient facts that it was mine from day one, bought and maintained entirely with my money, and that she'd been living there rent-free for years. At first I ignored it. Let her spin her fairy tale. The people who mattered would know the truth. But then the calls got stranger. My realtor phoned me one afternoon, his voice tight with annoyance. Danielle had shown up unannounced at one of his other property showings, cornering him in front of potential buyers. She demanded to know who had purchased the cabin and hinted that she might take legal action to get it back. She has no legal claim, Violet, he said, but she's willing to make a scene. I thanked him and hung up, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my door. Standing there was one of Danielle's closest friends, a woman I'd met maybe twice. She said she wanted to hear my side before she believed anything. At first, I braced myself for an argument, but then she told me something that made my stomach tighten. She'd been staying at the cabin on and off for the past few months, and Danielle had told her she owned it completely. Not a word about me. The friend wasn't there to defend Danielle. She was furious at having been lied to. Embarrassed, she'd bragged about weekends at Danielle's place to other people. Before leaving, she said something I couldn't shake. If she keeps pushing this, she's going to burn herself down. And that's exactly what started happening. By the weekend, cracks were forming in Danielle's story. A cousin called to tell me they'd overheard her yelling on the phone about people switching sides. Apparently, that same friend had confronted her. And instead of backtracking, Danielle doubled down, claiming I was lying to make her look bad, that I was jealous of her life. Then came the move I didn't see coming. The buyer of the cabin, a man I'd never even met in person, reached out through my realtor. Danielle had somehow tracked him down, walked into his office without an appointment, and demanded he undo the deal because it was a family matter. According to him, she got loud enough that security had to escort her out. He wasn't angry at me. In fact, he said he understood completely. But he made it clear. If she approached him again, he'd file a harassment report. That was when I realized I didn't have to fight this battle directly. Danielle was doing the work for me, pushing so hard, crossing so many lines, that she was building a case against herself without me lifting a finger. I didn't plan on stopping her. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let them dig the hole themselves. It was 3 days after the buyer called me about Danielle showing up at his office that my phone buzzed with a voicemail from her. No shouting, no accusations, just a flat, tired voice. I need to talk to you. Alone. She didn't say why, but I could guess. By now, She'd realized her campaign wasn't working. Too many people had heard the truth. And worse for her, the buyer had legal leverage she couldn't spin away. 3 days later, she appeared at my apartment. No rapid, impatient knock this time. She just stood there behind the frosted glass, waiting. I stepped aside to let her in. She walked into the kitchen and sat at the small table where I'd had countless quiet breakfasts alone. Her hands were clasped tight, her eyes restless, darting around the room but never settling on me. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward silence, it was the kind of silence that settles when both people know the balance of power has shifted. When she finally opened her mouth, the words came slowly. "I let things get out of hand," she said. "The post about the buyer, I deleted it. I didn't mean to cause trouble for him. I was just angry." I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to get it all out. "I know I've pushed too far," she continued, "and I've been under a lot of stress lately. You know how things have been." What I heard wasn't an apology, not really. It was a string of explanations, excuses, and half-admissions. When she stopped, I leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen, Danielle. No more unspoken favors. No more borrowing money you have no intention of paying back. No more living in anything I own ever. If you want something, you pay for it yourself. If you drag me into public drama again, I will cut contact completely. No discussions, no second chances." She looked like she wanted to argue. That little flicker in her eyes, the one that said she was scanning for a loophole, came and went. But she didn't speak. She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the table. For the first time in years, I felt the conversation tilting my way. "I mean it," I said. "This isn't a threat. This is the way it is from now on." Another nod. When she left, she didn't slam the door or mutter a parting shot. She just walked out, shoulders slightly hunched, the weight of the shift between us pressing down. I thought that was it, the clean break I'd been working toward. But a week later, the buyer called again. Danielle had contacted him directly, this time to ask if he'd consider selling the cabin to her. She'd offered full market value, though we both knew she didn't have anywhere near the money. It was almost funny she wasn't moving forward. She was still clinging to what she'd lost, convinced she could rewrite the past if she just pushed hard enough. The difference now? It wasn't my problem anymore. It's been a month since the last time I saw Danielle. No texts, no calls, no thinly veiled family updates from Elaine, no passive-aggressive group messages. The silence felt strange at first, like the pause before another round, but as the days passed, it started to feel steady. Robert and Elaine still talk to her, but from what I hear, it's strained. They've stopped covering for her. My father hasn't tried to mediate or guilt me back into the fold. My mother sounds quieter when she calls, like she's thinking twice before speaking. Danielle, from what I gather, is couch-hopping between friends, trying to convince someone to help her get the cabin back. The buyer, true to his word, filed a restraining order after she trespassed on the property one night. She didn't even show up to court. The police report, neighbor statements, and security footage were enough to seal it. When the buyer called afterward, it wasn't to talk about her. He just wanted to thank me. "It's rare," he said, "to see someone cut ties with chaos before it swallows them." The words stuck with me, maybe because they didn't come from family, maybe because they didn't come with strings attached. Danielle's latest story, according to a mutual acquaintance, is that she's starting fresh in another city. Whether that's true or just another reinvention, I don't care enough to find out. I do know this. I didn't just sell a cabin. I sold the last piece of ground she could stand on while talking down to me. I ended the unspoken agreement that I would always be the family's quiet safety net, the one who paid without being asked, who absorbed the hits without complaint. Now my weekends are mine. My money goes toward things that matter to me. The quiet in my apartment doesn't feel like an absence anymore, it feels like space. I'm not angry. Not at her, not even at Robert and Elaine. That surprised me. I thought I'd carry the bitterness forever. But what's left isn't anger, it's relief. Because for the first time in years, I'm not waiting for the next blow. I'm not enduring, I'm living. And there's no going back.